What's up, Nightmare Nerds? I'm Josh, and welcome to the Nightmare Network presentation of New Nightmare, a spoiler-free podcast where we discuss new and notable horror. On today's episode, we're looking at the long-delayed occult detective thriller, The Empty Man. The film was written, directed, and edited by David Pryor, and adapted from a graphic novel of the same name. It follows James LaSombra, a detective played by James Badgedale, as he investigates a missing person and ends up stumbling upon a dangerous cult. This is one of those films I have to give a lot of credit to for its ambition alone. It plays with a bunch of different genre conventions. It certainly wears its influences on its sleeve. I really like the tone and style of it, and it even features a wild prologue that could easily stand alone as a great short film. I thought it was a lot of fun, and even though Mike and I both agree it could get a little messy at times, what great film doesn't though, right? It still was a blast to talk about. Let's get to it.
So here we are, fresh off of our viewing of The Empty Man. We both had some pretty strong responses to it. So right off the bat, Josh, how did you feel about it?
I think overall I liked it. I know you texted me after I watched it. I didn't really have an opinion. I was still processing. I think I liked it. And I think I liked it because I felt it was pretty ambitious. It was a little bit different than your typical horror film. It was stylish. The scope of it was massive.
Yeah, it was definitely unexpected, which because we kind of talked about this. I think we both liked it and disliked it for the same reasons, and that the reasons that you liked it, I disliked it. I don't know. I appreciated it. Like, it definitely wasn't what I was expecting. So for those of you who don't know, The Empty Man has kind of been on a rough track to distribution for it's almost 4 or 5 years old at this point, and it was dumped last year after award season, right before the pandemic. So nobody went to see it. I'm pretty sure it's a Fox film. I think Fox wanted to dump it to, get some kind of money back for the investment that they made. They didn't know how to market it because it's not your typical horror movie, and it has a very long runtime. It's about 2 hours and 15 minutes long, which to any studio to see a horror movie at that length, if we're not talking It Chapter 2, is kind of a scary thing. And you can definitely see from this film why a studio would be afraid to put something like this out. And to your point, I think that's kind of why that those are the parts that I did enjoy, right? I remember when it came out, it was getting kind of parallels to like The Bye-Bye Man and Slender Man, which were like very bad movies. Not from content, but because that's just what people thought it was going to be. And when you watch it, that's not what it is at all.
Yeah. So from what I read, 20th Century Fox was the company, and then Disney acquired 20th Century Fox. Disney's got their own thing going on, so they dropped it.
I think this was their first R movie in like a very long time for Disney.
That's crazy. Yeah. So they dropped it. It arrived on VOD, I guess, earlier this year. And the reason that I came across it was because I saw a few articles about it, calling it like the next great cult movie.
I did read those articles from your suggestions, and we'll talk about whether we agree with them or not. But this was your suggestion, and we've done a lot of my suggestions, so I was very happy to take one of yours and run with it. When you first asked me how I liked it, I said largely negative initial response. And though I think we both agree the movie is just an absolute mess. That's why you liked it, right? Because it was ambitious.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as you know now, I do like big, messy, ambitious films. As long as they're, well acted and well conceived. I don't want to give them too much credit, but it seemed like a well conceived film.
I don't know if you know this. It's based on a graphic novel.
Yes.
Which I would love to read. That would certainly be very interesting.
Yeah, actually, I recommended it to a friend as well, and he just messaged me a couple hours before we started recording and was like, I hated it. It reminded me. He's a big X-Files guy. He's like reminded me of an X-Files episode.
So it's funny you say that, because this movie is like I don't want to say bad, because I don't want to talk down to this movie, because it really does go for it, which I really appreciate. And it is not a Bye-Bye Man, Slender Man type movie. The style is very complex. The narrative is very complex, which was refreshing to see. But it really does fall apart for me at the end. And the whole time I couldn't help but think that I was watching like a rehash of The Ring. there's a ticking clock. At some point, he goes to find answers to these murders, and he goes into the woods, into a cabin, and I'm literally like, he's gonna find a well here, right? It felt very Ring-like to me for most of the duration, but then it just goes off the rails, and which is cool. Like, it's cool, but it just kind of falls apart for me.
It's actually funny because I feel like you're watching it and you're like, is this like a supernatural, occult, psychological thriller? Is this a detective film? Are we watching like a teen slasher movie?
The one thing we did talk about that I cannot praise this movie enough is what you could call the prologue, because it's certainly not a first act. Like, you're watching this movie and you're like, where is this going? Because from the description that I read on IMDb, this is not what's happening. And the first 20 or so minutes of this movie, very unexpected, fantastically executed, very creepy. And I said this to you, I was bummed when it went away from that. I would have liked to spend the whole movie there where this takes place. And I don't know how you feel about that, but I was kind of bummed we left where it was.
I think it would be cool if they had released it as sort of like release the prologue as sort of its like own its own short film, like separate from the movie itself.
Yeah.
As sort of like a precursor that you could watch separately from the actual film. It is that good. Like, I feel like as a standalone short film,
it really
it's great.
is. Yeah, it really is, and I think it's more successful than the rest of the film. But it reminded me of? Have you ever seen A Serious Man?
Yeah.
Reminded me of that to a T. Like, you're watching this thing and you're like, what am I watching? And I remember Joel and Ethan Coen afterwards, when people were asking him about it, and they were like, we just thought it set the tone. and it definitely sets the tone. This is more connected to the main narrative than that, obviously, but it really comes out of nowhere, and it sets you up for this narrative of this retired police officer who is trying to find a missing girl. And it's detective story. It turns to the occult, where this girl is getting caught up in the occult. It turns into urban legends, which I really enjoyed that aspect of it. Mm-hmm. I think for me the problem was there were so many things I enjoyed, but because it wanted to be so ambitious, it didn't spend enough time on them. Like, I loved the urban legend aspect to it, but the second you kind of get settled into that narrative, it jumps from urban legend to cult, right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't let one stew long enough for, I think, it to be worth bringing up narrative wise, because I was getting invested in the urban legend, and then it was gone. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I see what you mean, and I feel like it was like pretty fragmented in that sense. And I know we talked about how messy it is, and it is messy, and the final act especially. I don't know how you said you didn't like the ending. Did you feel like you were confused for the last maybe like half hour of the film?
I felt like I honestly no. I felt like I knew exactly what was going to happen,
okay.
and it did, and I was like, this is dumb. Like, I wanted it to end. Like, I wanted it to end so differently. I wanted to not think it was dumb.
Yeah,
but I'm not gonna. I thought it was dumb, and because it raises more questions than it answers, not in a good way. You know, there are certain movies that will like The Prestige, right? Mm-hmm. Like that last shot of Hugh Jackman's quote unquote clone in the water tank. It makes you think like who's really running the show here. It makes you think of like what is The Prestige? Is this all an illusion? It raises more questions than it answers, which is good, which is great, which is why I enjoyed that movie. This one, it's like, okay, you waste so many questions that don't make any sense.
I think that's sort of what I'm asking, because I found myself just kind of drifting away as like the final act was unfolding. And I think too that like, because people are calling this like a new cult horror film, I think films like that tend to be the ones that get that cult following, the ones that like it might be like overly confusing or like too on the nose or whatever, but people still like to read into this type of thing. And on top of that, being dropped and having having that story of like was ready in 2017 and didn't get released until 2021. Like, all of these things work in its favor, but you're right. It is not the easiest ending, in my opinion.
I saw it coming, and I still had stupid questions I felt I did to answer. And at some point, this is mild spoiler. It's not. It truly has nothing to do with anything overall. But I hate it when horror movies are like, well, we got to throw a time loop in here at the end, right? Like just a dash of it.
Yeah.
When it doesn't need it. It came out of nowhere. One of my favorite movies is guilty of it, which is Gunjim Haunted Asylum, which we talked about, where he sees himself in the window at the end, and I think it works a little more successfully there. And like, I'm not saying it doesn't come up a lot, because it does. But if you want some good time loop movies, check out The Endless from Justin Benson and Aaron Moorhead. They have a horror movie called The Endless that actually does time loops really well. So if you guys definitely check that out, I would sadly recommend that more than The Empty Man. But there are just certain things at the end I felt were just stapled on for the sake of having that stylized kind of whoa climax at the end. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Run Lola Run. There's another time loop movie that's really well done.
That's a good one.
So the vibes that I was getting from it were like heavy David Fincher vibes in terms of the style of it. And I'm a huge Zodiac's one of my favorite movies of all time, and I was getting major like Zodiac. I was like, this is so derivative stylistically of Zodiac and like a few other Fincher films. And then I looked into David Pryor, who wrote and directed this film, and he's worked in sort of like behind the scenes documentary on set work.
I love it when you think you identify stylistic stuff in like in movies, and it turns out you were right, and you're like, yes.
Yeah. Maybe I should have looked into this ahead of time. Yeah.
I remember seeing Observe and Report in theaters. You ever seen that with Seth Rogen?
Yep.
Yeah, people kind of brushed it off as like a Paul Blart kind of movie because they came out at the same time, even though they weren't really related.
Yeah.
But I remember seeing it in theaters, and like I love that movie. It is messed up.
It's quite good.
Yeah, it's good. And I remember watching, I think the director's name's Jody Hill, and I remember watching it thinking like, this reminds me of Taxi Driver. Like it, and I said it to my friends, and then I went home and I watched an interview with him about it, and he was like, I wanted to make a comedic Taxi Driver. I was like, boom.
That's hilarious.
Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Jody Hill, he's done what, like Eastbound and Down?
Eastbound and Down, which is great. The Foot First Way, I think he did, which is pretty good.
Does he work on that, The Righteous Gemstones as well?
I'm not sure.
This is total tangent, but yeah.
Yeah, he's a cool dude.
Yeah.
One thing that this movie had going against it, in my personal opinion, is that Stephen Root is in it, and he is only in it for 5 minutes. And the entire time I was like, I want more Stephen. Like, he was such a good character. Mm-hmm. And like, he gave you a face to this cult, and he had some really good lines, and I just wanted more. I wanted more of him, and he's in one or two scenes, and it's just gone.
Yeah, I think that you're spot on too. I think one of the major flaws in this film is that it's too it follows this detective too closely, and it doesn't really allow any of the other characters to shine in their own way. You're kind of like along for the ride, and you're kind of learning things. Not that I'm against that concept. I like movies where you're kind of like learning along with the lead character, but it's really his film.
But, right. I like it when you're learning along with the main character, but the problem with this movie is that the things that he's learning have to make sense.
Yeah.
And at the end, they just don't. Even the answers they give you don't make sense. And that's why that's why it bothers me. I'm going to rewind and say this movie is not what you expect it to be, which is the great part of it, which is probably why at the end of this we will recommend it, because it is a very unique viewing experience. Mm-hmm. But to me, the narrative really falls apart at the end. But I will say there is one thing that truly terrified me about this and did strike a chord, which was the cult aspect of it, because it felt very relevant to what I personally am experiencing right now in my personal life, where I have, people that are very close to me losing themselves in QAnon conspiracy theories and, different. I had someone share the other day that they thought that there was going to be a Hunger Games scenario with the vaccinated and the unvaccinated, and this is how the government has a mass extinction of people, and so
Yikes.
yeah, and so me watching this and seeing this kind of cult that's believing in transmissions from another dimension, right? And this cop who's like this. Okay, no, this like I liked him a lot more just because he was so not even giving 1 ounce of thought to this cult. like that to me is probably like the funniest part about this movie is just like it's usually you watch cult movies and it's like the guy's slowly losing it and he's slowly starting to, and at no point in this movie is this dude ever like what you're saying is real. Even when like spooky stuff starts to happen, he's like, I'm gonna hit it with a baseball bat. You know what I mean? Like it's not like I like that part about it. That was pretty good.
Yeah, and I think that will work in its favor too, right? The fact that it deals with cults, and that's something that we're currently unfortunately. Well,
it's surprisingly relevant for a movie that's been in distribution hell for 4 years, right?
Exactly. Yeah, there were a couple lines that the detective had. The same line. I used to live in San Francisco. He says,
I used to live in San Francisco.
Yeah, it's like the 2 times I think where people are explaining things in a way that are kind of like hippy dippy, and he was he's like, I know, I used to live in San Francisco. It's so funny.
I will say, without spoiling it, the second time he said it, I figured out that's what gave it away for me. The second time he said it, I was
the second time he delivers it is just so corny too.
Yeah, it's corny. He's great in it though.
Yeah,
he's really good. The performances in this are actually very, very, very good.
I agree.
And that skeleton man, that's creepy.
There's one scene in particular. I thought you were going to touch on it when you touched on the cults. There's one scene in particular where he shows up to a place. I don't want to spoil it. That's really creepy. There's like some Wicker Man type shit happening.
Oh yeah. It reminded that scene reminded me of The Last Exorcism, which was one of the things that you made me watch. So yeah, again. I don't think any scene in this movie is like the one before it. It is quite a wild ride. Things like get left unanswered. Information gets taken for granted. It really falls apart at the end. And I would love to talk to you more about it. Maybe we'll revisit this in like a year or so and really dive into why I'm frustrated with it. But it is a very, very interesting, unique film that should not be chalked up to the likes of the Bye-Bye Man, Slender Man, all the Man movies, right?
Yep.
It's a unique experience, and if nothing else, watch it for the 20-minute prologue because it's some of the best horror filmmaking I've seen in a while. Yeah, and
you said it's 2 hours and 15 minutes, so it's a longer film, but it's paced pretty well. I would argue it's not like slow.
There's definitely some things looking back on it. I'd be like, we could have done without this entire thing.
Sure,
but watching it, it didn't slog or anything. It was compelling. It had good pacing and it kept you going forward. Mm-hmm. And so I think overall we would both probably agree that if you're looking for new nightmares to watch this weekend, The Empty Man is one that you can definitely put on your list.
Yeah, watch it.
All right, so I think that's going to wrap us up here. Please let us know in the comments what you thought of The Empty Man. If you're more Team Mike or Team Josh, hit us up on Twitter, Instagram, whatever you got. So from here at Nightmare Network, I'm Mike.
And I'm Josh.
We'll scare you later.
Thanks for listening to the Nightmare Network podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and don't be afraid to give us suggestions on movies that spooked you out for our next episode. You can visit nightmarenetworkofficial.com to submit your own nightmare to be adapted into a short film on our YouTube channel. As always, at Nightmare Network, you share your scares.